Hey folks, this is Lucid, and we are going to be doing a national overview for Lanka because I'm going to be playing them in an upcoming game. It was one of my favorite nations back in like Dom 4, Dom 3. I think probably more Dom 3. Uh, the avatar on my channel was a Mandaha at some point, and then I changed it. So yeah, uh, I dig I dig Lanka. Unfortunately for the nation of Lanka, it was considered pretty powerful in 4, but it received some significant nerfs going from 4 to 5. And unfortunately, I love Illunder to death. Unfortunately, sometimes when they nerf a nation, they nerf it in a lot of ways simultaneously that are all significant. And we'll talk about that because this nation was definitely one of the nations that got nerfed in several ways at the same time. Um, Yeah, I guess I'll go through it now. One thing was they used to be able to get indie priests, so you just build a temple in a province, you get indie priests, and you could use those to reanimate dead. You can no longer do that. Now you have to spend cap turns, and you're going to get one of these two guys to reanimate your undead or your long dead, and yeah, it makes it a much harder trade off because it takes way more like capital investment. You have to invest a lot more in infrastructure if you want to go like the undead route than just building a temple and making some indie priests. And it's going to tie up your fort turns where you would otherwise be kind of making researchers. So yeah, that was a pretty major nerf because that was a major part of playing Lanka was getting indie priests. And unlike Scalaria, which used to also rely on a similar mechanic, getting indie priests, Scalaria has one commander point recruitable cultists. But instead, Lanka has these guys, which are like the cheapest ones you can get, and they are not one commander point, they are two, and they require a lab to build, whereas the cultist only requires a temple. So again, more infrastructure. So anyway, the undead protection from Lanka is seriously, seriously nerfed. And a lot of players don't really like getting very much long dead with Lanka. And I'm a little on the fence now because it's really a trade off. You only have so many mages. We'll talk more about it later. The other major nerf were to their summons, specifically the Dakini. The Dakini was one of the best summons for blood, like per blood slave in the game. I think it used to cost 50 and now it's 81. So it's a major cost increase. Like 30 out of 50, that's like a 60% cost increase. I think that was the only thing that had a cost change, but there was a pretty strong contingent of folks who said the best this if you're Lanka, don't even worry about any of the units, just make Dakini. And it's really hard to argue with at 50 gems. Anyway, um, those are some of the changes, but now we're gonna go through the overview. And I've got the guide pulled up because I wrote this guide. This is on illwiki.com. We could do it in game, but honestly, if we're going to go through all the summons and stuff, it's actually really nice to be able to do it from one spot. And I've got the mod inspector, so we can go in there too. Okay, so let's start with the overview. It is one of the early game blood powers. It's one of the monkey nations, so it's in line with Kailasa and Bandar and Vitala. And yeah, there's this is kind of the most evil of the monkey nations, and they practice a lot of blood magic. They have death magic. The paths which they have pretty good are going to be air, death, blood, and nature. Everything else, they don't know much about that. So they tend to be reasonably hard hitting. A lot of their troops, like some of their more mundane troops, are animals with low MR, so they tend to kind of be vulnerable to that. Um, a lot of their sacreds, which they get, are demons, and there's not many recruitable demons in the game, but these are some of them. And yeah, so it's a nation that has a lot of sacred units. It's got a lot of demons. We talked about the magic paths. And they can also reanimate undead, and they get a bonus to reanimating undead based on whether they have turmoil or order. Where they, I'm sorry, not undead, blood hunting. They get a bonus to based on having turmoil instead of order. undead, they can do it, but there's no bonus. Um, yeah. And then finally, a lot of their troops have chaos power, which again is an incentive for you to play Turmoil if you go Lanka. And what that means is they're going to get a bonus to strength and defense and attack and maybe something else, or a penalty based on where you're fighting. And with that, if you have like unrest in a province, that will also count towards turmoil. So you can play, with order even, and just have really high unrest in places you're attacking. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. Now for their commanders, they add specifics for turmoil. I think the thing for blood hunting is I think you get one more slave or something like that per turmoil scale, if something like that. If you have a successful blood hunt, it's something like that. I'm not quite sure what it is. Okay, so now for our cap only mages. The first one, and this is one of the more classic units of Lanka, is the Rakshasa. And the Rakshasa basically gets air 2, death 1, blood 2, and then it's going to get one random of air, death, or blood. And I think it has another 10% random for these other things. Yeah. But it also has a 10% chance random for nature, which is kind of nice. What's important about these is they take 2 capital recruitment points, so you can get 1 per turn, whereas the other kind of big-time cat mage, the Rakshasa, she is 4 commander points. So it's slow to recruit, basically. One thing I didn't mention, and this is a peculiarity of the nation, is a lot of your demons, your sacred units, they tend to have fire vulnerability, which is especially interesting because Lanka is a nation which likes heat scales. It has a heat scale preference. Now, you could go ahead and be like, okay, well, I've got a fire vulnerability and I have a heat preference and I have a good sacred, so let's go Hellbless and go in the other direction. And you could do that. It's not a horrible idea, to be honest. But yeah, typically you want to go towards your scales because it's a lot better for income. But especially if you have a Niflheim in the game, eventually Illwinter will come up if you don't kill them. So anyway, okay, fire vulnerability, they have chaos power, they have a lot of HP, and you can basically use these guys as mages because they can do pretty big air magic. They're a little expensive for that role, and they're pretty good thugs. Next up, we have the Rakshasa, and they are special because they can transform. This is their second form. They have their first form, and I think they don't. I think you actually, when you recruit them, they come in this form. But anyway, you can change them. You can flip-flop them back and forth, kind of like a Scrotty. And yeah, they have basically a more tempting human-looking form rather than this ape. And they have a much higher kind of path variability in terms of what they get. They get 1/1/1/1 for all of their magic paths with only 1 holy. And their randoms are they can get 2 in air, nature, death, or blood. And there's some important combinations here, like potentially you can get nature 3, which would be the highest you could get on this nation. Potentially you can get death 3, which is the highest you can get on this nation. And then the other ones, air and blood, because this guy already gets air and blood 2. He's going to be getting, air 3 and blood 3 pretty regularly. So anyway, those are less special. This also is a guaranteed access to the air nature crosspath, which is nice for things like rainbow armor. And there's some other things that are important. She's stealthy, and that is very important, especially for various types of raiding. So sometimes you will probably want to thug potentially with her, even though these guys are normally your go-to thug, because she's stealthy. Being stealthy also means she can do assassination. She's a seducer. So you don't even have to buy her a black heart. These are all excellent seducers or assassins. With these paths, it's very, very hard for people to reliably defend against an assassin that can either do swarm or skelly spam or air elementals. So very good assassins, and there's an item in the game that gives you basically, it's cheap too, and basically it's a hat that gives you the ability to summon a bull at the start of combat, and that's obviously going to be very good in an assassination. So yeah, I think oddly enough, Lanka has some of the best assassin game in early era, which is never really how you see them played. And Lanka, in a lot of ways, and it's kind of a theme for this nation, in my opinion. It's a nation that can get pulled in so many different directions. You can get lost for kind of deciding which direction you want to go in. And there's nothing that says you have to kind of hard commit and go in one direction, but you can't do everything. And that I think is the main theme of Lanka, and we'll come back to that. Okay. Next up, we have the Rock Tapata. This is probably one of the better mages in the game. There's a few things that are really nice about it. It is a nice chassis because it has pretty high base HP. And I think we're going to come over here to the mod inspector real quick. Because there's a few things I want to show you. The Rock Tapata, 21 HP. What this means is with regen on him, he will be regening for 3 per turn. So he makes a decent turbo communion battery. And it's very easy to get him up to 5 HP a turn if you have regen cast on them in addition to a bless. So potentially they can be pretty good turbo communion batteries. And then because they're this high HP, they don't really have to worry about a lot of the things that will normally kind of like nuke mages on the strategic map. So yeah, they're pretty solid. They have some weaknesses, like the animal tag isn't great, but they have okay MR, so it's not a huge deal. And they're reanimator priests, which is super important. So yeah, these are one of the better mages in the game. You're going to have a ton of them. You can also make a lot of Kalamuka, which are basically, they're better Raktapata. And their paths are, it's blood 1, and then you get a random of death, nature, or blood. So the blood 2s are interesting because we have a few spells which we cast. Especially, I'll just show you some of the national spells real quick because we're going to kind of be zipping around. Here we go. So I don't know why it's not showing all of them here. So I know we have more than that. Or I'm at least highly suspicious. Sometimes it gets a little fussy. Okay, so there's a few things. You can see like Feast of Flesh, you need to have the nature blood cross path. And this is going to give you, we'll talk about the summons, but anyway, just know that this is one of the guys who can do it, the Kalamuka. But then there's a lot of things which require blood too. The Esrapas require blood too, and so do the Rakshasa Warriors. So yeah. Trying to think what else. Yeah. There's a lot of things that require death blood. The thing is, for the death blood, you're going to need blood too. So a lot of times when you're doing the death blood stuff, you're going to be using your cap-only mages or some summoned mages. You're not really going to be using the Kalamuka. So what is important about these? Because I don't want to skim over them too quickly, because you can look at them and you'd be like, well, whatever. Well, the blood ones are going to be your best blood hunters, or these guys are going to be your primary blood hunters, but the blood ones are going to be good blood hunters. They also are holy too, so they're going to be doing reanimation duties better. One way to look at these is almost everything these guys can do better. Like, these guys reanimate better. They're going to blood hunt better if the blood varieties. They're going to be able to summon better stuff. But they're way more expensive. So it could be that rather than put a lot of money at the beginning of the game into infrastructure so you can get a lot of Raktapata, you may decide to, instead of having a lot of infrastructure and a lot of Raktapata, just get, fewer Kalamukas. The other thing they can do that's pretty important is they can join Sabbaths. And Because they're holy 2, you only need 2 Tapata and a Kalamuka, which is not a lot of gold, to have a holy 3, because we don't have a holy 3 for the nation. So if you've got a lot of sacreds, which as Lanka you typically would, it is basically, it's a little trivial to get up to holy 3. So that's one of the things you can do with these guys. Obviously, you can do it with Tapata too, but you need 4 slaves and 1 master. The other thing that is nice about using these guys as communion masters is because you can do things like put personal regeneration on your communion. You can do skelly spam. Like these guys, you could have 2 Tapata support skelly spam for probably like 4 masters, as long as one of them is a nature mage, so that they get regen cast on them. So, because also with 4, the masters will kind of fatigue out before it gets to be a huge problem. And then you can also, because you're in a Sabbath, you can pretty trivially cast Reinvigoration and get the slaves all fixed up. It is off-path casting, so you'd probably be a little careful. Maybe 4 to 2 would be burning a little hot, 4 masters to 2 with off-path casting, but with personal regen, these guys might be able to handle it. I would have to test it, but it's going to be close to that. Like I would be very confident saying they could handle 3. Okay. Next up, we have the Yogini. Now, every mage we've talked about is going to be sacred so far. So that's the other nice thing, is kind of reduced upkeep. You know, a lot of these aren't super high upkeep. The Yogini, however, is reasonably cheap. Wait, this can't be right. It should be 2 nature. Let's see, do we have a typo in here? I think we do. Yeah, it should be 2. So anyway, the Yogini is 1 death, 2 nature, and 1 blood. There's some things that are notable about this. One is 2 nature is a very good fluffing path. Or not even just fluff, like you're going to be very good at buffing like your troops with wooden warriors. They're going to be very good at casting things like, obviously protection wooden warriors, but also, with the gem they can do regeneration, and then they can do personal regeneration, so they can pretty trivially put stuff onto communions. They can spam swarm. They can cast enlarge, which can be pretty nice. A lot of you guys are size 3, and jumping up to size 4 isn't always awesome. But anyway, that's the thing. And then, yeah, because mass protection, you only need 2 nature gems, and being nature 2, you can cast it. Every single Yogini can do mass protection, so that's a pretty good use of them. Yeah. And then it's also very reliable. Like, these are all non-cap only. The Rakapata is reliable for being blood 1, but like if you want to use the Kalamuka as communion masters, they're going to be reliable for holy 2, but they're not going to be super reliable for like nature and death. So, one thing you could consider is having Rakapata as slaves and then a Yogini as a master. And then maybe 1 Kalamuka just to do divine blessing and stuff. Okay. Next up, we have the units. And then we're going to come back to the summonable commanders. But the units, we have the Palankasha. I probably said that right. Palankasha. Anyway, they're 55 gold, so they're pretty expensive. They're a cap-only demon, 30 HP, chaos power, 12 protection, 19 strength. We can pull them up here. Maybe it's a little better. Yeah, super solid unit. They're hungry, they eat a lot, but they don't need to eat. So anyway, they'll be basically make everything else in the army with them starve. But yeah, they have dark vision, which is pretty nice. They take a fair amount of resources. Not a ton, but for Lanka, kind of a fair amount. So you're going to have, until you get your cap circle cleared, you'll have a little trouble getting them. And just to put it in perspective, like they're almost the cost of a Tapata. So as the game, what I have found when I play Lanka is as the game goes on, especially if you're blood hunting a lot, you're not going to have the luxury to recruit troops like these. But at the beginning of the game, These are awesome. They hit really hard. They have a nice little buckler to block arrows. They're pretty solid. I don't think they have a hat. So yeah, no hat. So they're a little vulnerable to archer fire or to like really big things like giants, because giants tend to kind of bonk them on the head and then they die. Next up we have the Anisara, and these are much cheaper. And potentially you can mass them very, very quickly. They have a mace, which is pretty high damage. They don't have armor, but they do have a buckler. And they have no headgear. They're basically, if you're going to use them, the plan is normally have them run in and kill everything real quick before they die. They do pretty okay in melee combat because they have pretty decent stats, especially if they're fighting in turmoil. But yeah. Next up is the Asara, and these used to be awesome in Dominions 4. The other thing that changed is the bless system, and this was one of the nations that really liked going for basically some kind of like imprisoned hell bless. And with the changes to Dom 5, you can no longer get the things that are incarnate. You can't have quite as big of a mega bless. Like the things that are a mega bless, you can't really go imprisoned if you want them, like Regen and Blood Vengeance. My favorite build for Lanka was Regen, like basically N9, B9, and I can't remember if I got another one. I might have had another 9. Maybe it was, I think I just did a double bliss. I think it was just N9, B9. And then maybe a little bit of death or something. But what was nice is when you did that, you got all this bonus strength from going blood. Blood in Dominions 4 used to give you strength bonus. And these guys have a ranged javelin, and they're very strong. Click on them. They're 18 strength. They're 20 strength. And in chaos or turmoil, they're going to be even higher. What that means is they can chunk this javelin pretty damn far, and there's 2 of them, and not only is the javelin going to be thrown far, but it doesn't, basically you're going to hit them for the value of your strength. I mean, this is going to peg somebody to a tree. So these guys do a shit ton of damage. They also have pretty good HP, and then with something like Regen, Blood Vengeance, you peg a lot of people to trees, you close in melee, they hit you a few times, they take Blood Vengeance checks, and then they rout. And yeah, pretty solid. The problem a little bit is it's a little hard to get all of that. You can't get, in my opinion, you can get a lot of different blesses, but you can't get, like, Blood Vengeance is way more expensive in Dom 5. So yeah, you can't get as much. Next up, we have the Kalamuka Warrior, and these are Recruit Anywhere Sacreds, whereas everything above was just camp only. These are Recruit Anywhere, and what that means is, yeah, you can get them in every single fort, and you can get a fair amount of them. If you go this way, they take a fair amount of resources. 20 resources. I don't know if it has recruitment points here. But, yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, and they're expensive, right? They're kind of the price of a Knight of the Chalice. So, and I don't really think they're necessarily as good as a Knight of the Chalice. I mean, they have a lot more hit points, and they have more strength. But they have 1 weapon rather than 2. I think I'd rather have Knights of the Chalice. They also have some bad tags. They've got only 10 MR with the animal tag, which is kind of a problem. But they do not have the demon tag. And that is very significant because the demon tag sucks. Especially in the late game. Like, the spell that basically counters all the demon nations is Demonic Cleansing. And when that comes out, you want to frickin' cry. But these guys have to worry about a whole slew of other things like Beast Mastery and stuff because they're animals. But anyway, if Demonic Cleansing comes out, these guys are going to dodge it because you can see they're not a demon. And then also you have some like demon targeting weapons, etc., 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 that these guys can dodge. There's a lot of people and also these guys don't have chaos power, so you can, if you want to play Order bless Lanka, you can, where your strategy revolves around getting these guys. Now they're a little cheaper. Like if we compare them, because I kind of want to, like if we compare them to the Palanksha, they're cheaper by a tiny bit, but they've got significant worse stats. Like HP 6 less, which is kind of a lot. Protection a little bit better. Strength a little bit worse. Actually, I guess they're okay because they also have a hat. Yeah, actually, I'm kind of looking at them and I'm thinking these guys might actually be better for expansion. They're more resources, but they're cheaper. They don't have as much HP, but they do have hats. And hats are important for expansion. Interesting. I'll have to try that. So anyway, it's a cool unit. You can spam them out. Coming back. Now we're into our not... All these are sacred, right? And then coming down, these are not sacred. We have the Bandar Warrior. And the Bandar Warrior, I have been trying so hard to make... And I'll probably try more before the game actually starts. It hasn't started yet. To figure out how to make Scales Lanka work. Because I would love, absolutely love, to have a strategy which revolved around massing Bandar Warrior. Balls, who was one of the kind of early Dominion's guide writers, he had some really cool guides on on Bandar Log, and I think it was called like "You Beat Me with What?" And this Sticks and Stones attack is pretty interesting because it's got 30 ammo, and they basically shoot twice per round, and the damage is going to be 3 less than your strength. So if you buff strength up on your light Bandar Warriors, which is tricky to do at the beginning, but like later, later ranged attacks kind of suck. And this isn't a nation that has access to flaming weapons or anything. Though you certainly could get on your pretender. But yeah, these guys potentially can, like if you give them a +4 strength buff, these are going to be very damaging Sticks and Stones. They're going to be hitting for 19 minus 3, which is going to be 16 damage, and you're going to be doing 2 of those a turn. And then they're no slouches in melee. They hit like a freight train in melee. So the problem is I've had trouble expanding with these, just to put it simply. Like trying to figure out you could go Awake Expander kind of scales and like have no bless essentially and just get the cheapest Awake Expander you can, and then you could kind of play like a Scales Lanka, but it's not really Scales because you went Awake Expander. It'd be kind of Scales. Semi-Scales. But I don't really... The interesting thing, what would be greedy, is if you could go for some kind of like Imprisoned Bless for Sacreds in the late game, and then in the early game you just played kind of like Bandar Log. That would be very greedy, but it would also be very cool if you could pull it off. To be clear, I cannot pull it off. I have tried, and not in like a multiplayer, but just in testing. I've never gotten something I felt comfortable taking to multiplayer. Next up, we have the Light Bandar Warrior. These are basically, they're 16 gold, so they're kind of expensive, but they have a longbow. And that longbow is, we'll look at these guys, the Light Bandar Archer. The longbow is significant because they have really high strength, and the longbow is a good weapon. So they're going to shoot pretty damn... they're going to shoot pretty damn hard. So, pretty good ranged unit versus, their longbows are long range, so you can potentially win, like, an archery war against archers. But you want to be out of range, because if the archers are shooting you, you're going to get pincushion. These guys have no armor, though they do have an okay bit of HP. They have a mace, so they hit kind of hard in melee. But they have okay stats, I guess, but I don't know. I've never really tried these guys with expansion. Maybe I just need to mess around more with Lanka, but they're interesting. I've never really made them in a game. But that doesn't mean they can't be made to work. Next up, we have the Atavi Infantry. The Atavi are all stealthy. I'm not sure if the Mercado are stealthy. Are the Mercado stealthy? They are not. Just the Atavi. Yeah, so the Atavi are noteworthy for being stealthy. You basically have the infantry. These guys, I believe, have a stick and stone attack. Yeah. Their sticks and stones suck, kind of, because they're really weak. Like, they don't have high strength, and you really need high strength for sticks and stones to be reasonable. They also have low protection. They have bad... Okay. Everything beneath here we have to talk about. The problem is they tend to be very easy to kill, and they tend to have low morale. And you can have low morale on not very high morale on a very durable unit, and that unit's going to stay in combat and fight for you for a long time. You can have high morale on a really crappy, weak, fragile unit, and that unit will kind of stay in for a long time until they've gotten the crap beat out of them, and then they're finally going to run. Everything here, they have the interesting combination of being both very, very fragile and having low morale, which basically means they're going to make an appearance on the battlefield, but don't count on much more than that. When would these be something you might consider? Maybe, well, for stealthy raiding, you can potentially come up with squads. And having stealthy raiding's kind of useful. I mean, in certain situations, it's better than others. You don't really have a lot of stealthy commanders. If we look at the commanders, we do have the Atavi chieftain, which I didn't really list the commanders in that other guide, but in terms of mages, really it's just the Rakshasa. So potentially she could lead like a squad of stealthy Atavi and put wooden warriors on them or something. Like that could be a thing. But are these guys with wooden warriors going to be terribly good? No, they're going to be pretty horrible. So anyway, you have stealthy raiding options. The Atavi archers, they're notable for being 7 gold and having a short bow. And if we look at their strength, it's pretty comparable to humans. So basically it's just a super cheap, stealthy, highly massable short bow. Now what's important about that? Well, the only thing that's really important is your enemy may not be expecting this. So you can have these guys, like 100 of them, because they're not very expensive. It's only 700 gold. You could have 100 of these guys just pop out and, show up with your main army. And that may not be something your enemy is planning on. So if you're fighting things like elves or, stuff that really doesn't like a lot of archer fire, these might be your guys. Okay, who next? Let us take a look. Let us take a look at the Mercado. The Mercado are mostly noteworthy for being 5 gold. They're eminently spammable. Compared to the Atavi Infantry too, the Mercado has better defense. And if you consider that they're both probably going to die in one hit, you may say, well, let's go for the Mercado. The problem with the Mercado is they hit for 8 damage. All right, they're not going to do shit. These guys also have a buckler, so they'll block. They're going to be better against ranged attacks. Though versus melee attacks, I think I'd still rather have the Mercado. The only real role these guys have is eating lance chargers, and they're actually very, very efficient at eating lance chargers. So if you have heavy cav you need to take, you probably need to put some Mercado in your army. The Mercado archers are really only good against something that would be very low protection, and you want to kill them with because their short bow does garbage damage. If we look at them, it's a 6 damage plus it's going to be a third of this, so 2. So it's going to be an 8 damage. Or actually, I guess that's not horrible. But if we compare it to these guys, well, the thing is, if it's 8, let me pull up the Atavi archer. Did it not sort by this? These are going to be 4 plus 6. I think this is 10. So that 2 difference, you might be like, well, these are still efficient for they've got higher defense, so maybe if things close in melee, they'll be a little better. And then, they're significantly cheaper, so maybe it's worth it to have an 8 damage short bow versus a 10. And I could be a little off on the numbers. I think that's what they are with the rounding. But if something has like 10 protection, which is very, very common, this guy will actually be able to do some chip damage, whereas this guy won't. So it's like a threshold thing, right? So being able to do some damage is a lot better than being able to do none. So a lot of guys which can do none aren't going to be as good as one guy who can do some. That's kind of the idea. I've never really seen Mercado archers work very well, but if you had very low protection stuff, they might be pretty good. Okay. Now we get to the summons. These are kind of the cool things. One thing I wanted to use this guide for is I've calculated the cost per unit for things where you get multiple units per cast. And anyway, I think that's kind of useful to help figure out like which ones are the best value for you. Okay, so we're going to start at the top and work our way down in terms of value. The Mandahas are the best. They're the most expensive, the biggest, the baddest. They fly. They're 133 blood slaves. They have air 3, death 3, blood 2, holy 3. So they can do divine blessing. They can do all of your big air and death spells. They're not as good at blood mages as the Dakini, though. So if you want to be dropping blood stuff, you probably want the Dakini to do it. A lot of your troops are Chaos Power 1. These guys are Chaos Power 2. They are also Dark Power 3, which means if you were in Turmoil 3, or the equivalent amount of unrest, you are going to be getting +6 to all of your stats. In addition, you're almost always going to be in darkness unless somebody does Solar Brilliance. And you're going to be Dark Power 3. Yes, that's going to give you another 3. So you're going to be at basically 9 to all of your attack and defense and strength stats, which is pretty sick. Additionally, things that are near you can fall asleep. So good luck surrounding you. Flying, autocast darkness, which is like an 8 gem spell at the start of combat. So that's huge. This is one of the main reasons you get them. Fear 8, fire vulnerability 10, so which is pretty high. Now, the thing is, so this guy is kind of a super combatant. You can use him as a super combatant. I've used them as super combatants. The thing is, it's a little bit like the Dione problem. By the time, and it's exaggerated because, like when you're playing Yomi, you use Dione as super combatants for a while, and you'll always use them some as super combatants, but towards the end of the game, you want to transition them more into like a caster role, because there's just, for demon super combatants, there's a lot of ways to kill them, is the short of it. And you've spent so many blood slaves on this guy. This is how I've seen it happen when I fought against Mandaha super combatants or when I've used them myself. They're so expensive. You have this sunk cost of all of these blood slaves, and you're going to super combatant with this guy. So you're like, well, I better, go ahead and put a lot of gear on them so they don't die. I don't want to lose my 130 slave investment. And it works for a little bit, and then the guy dies. It's just, there's a pretty good number of ways to kill them. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I prefer, I think, other more budget-friendly options. That's what I'm trying to say. But, these are phenomenal to have one in each army just for the autocast of darkness. But, they're super strong mages, too. And what's nice about them is, a lot of other things I've been mentioning, Sabbaths, you could rely on Sabbaths. These guys just take you out of the loop of needing Sabbaths. You just don't have to give a shit about Sabbaths. These guys are going to, be able to do Divine Blessing and be able to do Darkness. You give them a Crystal Shield or some Air Hat, and they can do Fog Warriors like turn one. They don't, you don't have to wait. They also, this is a nation, I haven't really talked about it yet. They have the Death Air Cross Path, which is like a huge deal because it means all of a sudden you can start doing Wind of Death. You can start doing Wailing Winds. It's a really big deal having access to that. Like, especially where you don't have to do boosting. Like, these guys can drop major air death spells like turn 1 of combat. So, yeah. I like them a lot. They're, I think, one of the cooler units in the game. Next up, we have the Dakini, which at 50 gems, you really had to want to make a Mandaha. Like, you wouldn't want to double stack Mandahas and armies. You're really doing it for the darkness. At 50 Blood Slaves, they were just such value. At 81, I think they're appropriately priced. And as somebody who liked Lanka a lot, it's hard for me to say that because, of course, I would rather them be 50 and then, whatever. We get to play them with 50 costs like they used to be. But I think this is an appropriate price. Honestly, I don't think... I think Lanka got nerfed to be on par with a lot of other nations in early age. They're just not super duper powerful anymore. I think this is the right price for them. I think getting rid of the indie priests, I think it was pretty good. I mean, but they got hit by the nerf bet pretty hard in a few ways, but I think it was appropriate, and I think the nation is still playable and good, but yeah, it makes you also think more, because no longer is it just like spam out Dakini. Now, what makes Dakini so good? Well, they're flying, which is nice. They're sacred. They have Chaos Power 1 like everything else. Now they have damage reversal. This is unique to them amongst the Lanka lineup. They have damage reversal, which functions defensively. So that means if damage is coming in, the opponent takes an MR check. If they fail that check, then instead of the Dakini getting damaged, they get damaged. You follow? So like Blood Vengeance, the way that works is if you get damaged, then in addition to you getting damaged, the enemy gets damaged. With damage reversal, instead of you getting damaged, the enemy gets damaged. So it's a defensive and offensive trait. They have Fear, which is pretty nice. Flying, a little built-in shock resistance. That's really, I think, just from the air. And then, these guys make excellent thugs. They also have an S theme as their default weapon. And this is a life drain attack, so it's going to help with fatigue issues. I believe you can also give them a shield, and they will keep their Athame attack. And then they have a skull necklace, which provides some body and head protection. It's not a lot, but especially if you give them another protection buff, it can be enough. So they're very capable of budget thugging, and they can do with more gear. They have some kind of weaknesses, like they don't have a huge amount of HP. That's kind of probably one of their bigger weaknesses, aside from just being a demon. Which is not really a good tag to have for most of the time. But yeah. What's their natural protection? 1. Yeah. But yeah, I think hit points is probably the biggest weakness they have. All right. Next up, we have the Samanishada. I think I criminally underused these when I was playing them before, Lanka before. 35 slaves, which is quite affordable. They're a demon and an assassin, and they're sacred with Chaos Power 1 and Dark Power 2. Now, what's important about Dark Power is a lot of assassinations happen at night. I think it's 50%. So 50% of the time, you're going to be getting 2 to all your stats. They have fire vulnerability, which kind of sucks. And then what's important about them is they come equipped with a Moonblade and with a Dusk Dagger. Yeah. Now, for those of you who don't know, these are top-end weapons. So let's pull this guy up. Commander Summon. Now, this is I think this is a special one. Yeah. This is a special one. It's a one-handed Moonblade. But still, 2 times damage versus magic beings, which is a lot. Because these guys have high strength, too. So, and it's going to be 2 times damage of a really high base damage. And then Dusk Daggers. These are one of the best anti-elite weapons in the game because it's armor negating damage. And then it's going to do a bleed attack, which will cause fatigue and damage over time. So super duper good. And then he has ambidextrous, so he's not going to get the attack penalty. Now, he doesn't have any, like a holy path, so you have to figure out how you're going to get him blessed if you find that important. Now, you don't have to. In no way do you have to get him blessed. In my opinion, the budget gear for these guys is just a lifelong protection. And, yeah. Like with the lifelong protection, these guys can do a lot of work. A lot of work. That's going to give them cover while they run in and literally tear things apart with this. I'm sure there's some kits, like mage kits or like mages with spells, like especially if you're not blessing them, or they don't have any fire resistance and they summon a fire elemental. These are short weapons, which are going to get, and he'll burn himself alive on a fire elemental. So there's definitely things you have to be careful about, but I think these guys are good. I didn't use them a lot. One way to think about it is you're getting this assassin for almost the cost of a black heart. I think black hearts are 15. Are they only 10? Okay, they're 10. They're kind of cheap, actually. So yeah, they're not going to be... The thing is, they're not going to be as good as your Rakshasas. They're not going to be as good. But you're not... These are slow to recruit out of your capital. Like, you're not going to be able to have a ton of them. And typically with assassins, you want a critical mass. So these are going to be like super combatant killing assassins. And these are going to be like, kill everybody else. So anyway, that's that. Next up we have unit summons. So we have the Dinava. And these are interesting. You get 3 of them for 75, so it's 25 per. So they're quite expensive. They come with a very, very good kit of weapons. They've got the Unholy Spear, the Unholy Sword, and the Unholy Axe. And they basically all have Halt Heretic, or Halt Sacred, which is going to basically paralyze Sacred. So if you're fighting thugs or something, I mean, God, these guys tear thugs apart. Especially like Sacred thugs. And then they have, the armor is nothing to write home about. But what is something to write home about is 92 HP. That is a lot of HP. They're units, but if you Gift of Reason them, they basically are going to become Holy 2, and then they're going to have chances of blood or air, which is kind of nice. 25% of them will be air 2, or 25% will be blood 2. And then you're going to have a lot of things which are going to have just a smattering of these paths, and then a very small number will have no magic paths, but they'll still be Holy 2. And you're going to be able to put items on them if you want to. In some ways, this is going to potentially be your hardest, like, true thug chassis that's kind of budget. Like, you can compare them to the Mandaha, and they're pretty similar. Like, they've actually got better HP. They have 4 arm slots, and generally arm slots for like thugs and super combatants are one of the best slots in the game for that, because you can do multiple shields. You can handle like fatigue real well with arm slots, because you can do like life drain, which is going to help you, maintain your HP pool and your fatigue, which is going to free up kind of your other slots to do other things. They only have 1 miscellaneous slot, I think, so that's kind of the trade-off they have for 4 hands. The real cost, they're totally fine as units. You're not going to be able to, I don't think, have a huge army of Dinavas. They're so expensive. But you can have them on kind of like a special forces team in your army. If you want to make them commanders, the real cost is going to be Gift of Reason and Divine Name. Yeah. Okay, Esrapas. These are very interesting. They're interesting. So first of all, they're cheap. It's 3.6 slaves per Esrapa. It's 11 for 3. And they're sacred, they're demons, they're berserkers, which is interesting, because that means you're not going to have to worry about things like repel. You're not going to have to worry about morale plays. They have chaos power, but what they do not have, unlike a lot of things that Lanka has, is they do not have any fire weakness. the Berserker also is potentially going to give them very good stats. They're going to get +3 strength. They're going to get +3 attack. And then I think they lose a tiny bit of defense. But, and they get a bonus to protection, which may or may not matter. So, yeah, they're pretty good. Importantly, the Athame is also a magic weapon. So if you don't take a magic weapon bless, but you feel in dire need of them, they're going to be one of the, not the few, but some of your summons have magic weapons, some don't. This is your cheap summon with a magic weapon. And they also have pretty good attack density. They 4 attacks per square. Almost, not almost. I gotta be careful because there's a lot of summons. A lot of your summons only have 1 attack. Not all of them, but anyway, these guys have 2. And what's nice is the kick is going to get a bonus from strength. And these guys, because they're demons, like Bloodlust comes out really early, they're going to be having a lot of strength bonuses. So, yeah. Pretty solid, especially like these guys can survive in a lot of armies with Rigor Mortis up too because of the Athame. As long as they're getting hits, they're going to, and they don't fall asleep, because once they fall asleep, they may never wake up to swing that Athame again. Yeah, they're probably going to be fatigue 0 for all of combat. Weaknesses, a little low on HP. Also, you can divine name these guys if you want to. I think it's more relevant for like Bandar Log and Vitala. But this is a way to break into blood with them. Next up, I have some interesting comments here on this. So, this gives Esrapas, okay, yeah, okay, so once Berserk in Turmoil 3, this is just vanilla, right? Their Athame will be a 20 attack, 23 magic damage, and their kick will be an 18 attack, 19 damage. That is killy, all right, guys? Like, that is very killy, and that's the Berserk with Chaos Power. You're basically getting +6 to all your stats. So, like, when we looked at these stats, we're like, oh, this is an okay stat line. Now, you're getting +6, +6, +6. Well, no, you don't get +6 to defense. You get +3, and I forget how Berserk affects defense. But, yeah, this is a 4 damage weapon. So, yeah, they're going to be hitting hard. Next up, we have the Santialaba, or however you say it. You can tell we're not even trying very hard on the pronunciation here. So these are expensive. Let's just get this out of the way. 30 blood slaves for 3. That's like 10 per. I could have 3 Esrapas for each one of these guys. And you remember, I was saying these guys, once they go berserk, they're going to be nuts. Right? They hit super hard, and with a magic weapon. Well, the Sandihiblas, or however we're going I'm saying a different way every time. Anyway, they also have magic weapons. They have a Moonblade. And so if you're fighting things that are magical, these guys are going to tear them in half. Tear them absolutely in half. Now, they don't have the Dusk Dagger like the commander version of them does. Instead, they have a buckler. They do have dark power. And they have chaos power. Now, the dark power is not a huge deal because it's only going to give you 1, I believe, attack and defense and strength. But, it's still 1 more. So, it's going to basically be +4 to all these stats when you're in Turmoil 3 and you're in the darkness. Like, by the time you get this guy, they're well, not really. But if you have Mendahaz up, you'll be having darkness. So, yeah, I mean, that's going to be 24, 18, 17. These are very good stats, obviously. But they're expensive. I don't think they're unjustifiably expensive. But, what are you getting? I mean, you're getting a magic weapon on a reasonably high protection chassis compared to the Esrapas. Like, the Esrapas are pretty low protection. With more HP. But also lower attack density. Like, you don't get the kick. But you're going to have maybe a little better stat line, but these guys have Berserk, which is really nice too. If you go like Blood Bond, Esrapas are going to be especially nice because Blood Bond works really well with Berserk. I have subbed into a game where somebody was getting their ass kicked by Lanka, and I took over that responsibility. And a Blood Bond Lanka just ran all over me, so that was a lot of fun. I'd like to say I put up a good fight, but I don't think I killed anything, which very rarely happens, even when I sub in games. But I just got complete. I mean, Blood Bond's one of those things. Either you can kill the stuff or you can't. And if you can't kill it, you just get completely demolished without really causing much attrition a lot of times. So anyway, that's these guys. But yeah, they're super expensive. Now, when we compare them to the Rakshasa Warrior, these guys are much more moderately priced. These are, I think, the Rakshasa Warrior. This is like the mid-water line in terms of how, like, these guys are obviously the super high end. These guys are high end. In between, and Esrapas are kind of lower end. These guys are like in the middle. They have, I'll go ahead and pull them up. They have pretty good protection, 15. They don't have a hat, but that's fine. Yeah, so reasonably high protection, pretty high HP. They have this two-handed iron cudgel. And oh boy, does it hurt. 8 damage, plus you're getting, what, 1.25 times your strength? So that's going to be like 25 strength plus this is going to be... Yeah, I mean, they're hitting for like low mid 30s, right? And then by the time you do Bloodlust on them, they're going to be hitting for like high 30s. Like, they hit very, very, very hard. Their attack stats are okay. They're not great, but like in Chaos 3, again, this is going to be 16 attack, so pretty solid. And so anyway, I think these guys, in my opinion, they have fire resistance -5, which is kind of, some of them have 10, but these guys are kind of like less weak to fire than other stuff, but they're not like the Esrapa, which don't have the fire penalty at all. And their morale's okay. I mean, their MR's okay, 13. Like, if we could look at the Esrapa, I can't remember the Esrapa is. Oh, 14. So yeah, these might be... God, there's a lot of things that make these guys really nice in the late game. The Berserk. I'm kind of torn, actually. I haven't decided what I'm going to do. Now we're going to get to the more bargain bin version summons. We've got the Rakshasa. So this is the Rakshasa Warrior. This is the Rakshasa. And basically, it's this guy without the cudgel and the armor. And you get them super early. Like, we go to the spells section. The Rakshasas you get at Blood 1. And they're reasonably mage turn efficient. You only need to be Blood 1 to summon them. So you could potentially, like, you could imagine going for like a fountain, a blood fountain, using your garbage. Lanka's starting army is garbage. You can just use them to patrol, and you could have your blood fountain just blood hunting from turn 1. Or, maybe turn 2 or something if you need to research summon Rakshasa. And you could just start getting these guys right away. Right away. Yeah. I mean, that would actually... I might even do that in a test game, just see what it feels like. Now, they're notable. They have a pretty good amount of HP. So, if you're thinking, too, like Blood Vengeance, which I'm definitely thinking about very hard, in terms of, like, converting Blood Slaves into HP, which would then trigger Blood Vengeance, these are not bad. Because if we go back and we look at the cost, they're about the price of a Dakini. Not a Dakini, an Esrapa. They're a little cheaper, but you're getting significantly more HP. You're getting 28. And then they have 2 claw attacks, which are 19 damage. So they actually have pretty, like, versus less armored things, like Indies. They're going to tear Indies apart. The only problem is they're going to get torn apart too. Yeah. But they're pretty cool. I kind of dig them. And I mean, their siege strength's going to be... These are great siege chaff, too. Okay, so that was the Rakshasa. Next up, we have the Pragasa, and the Pragasa. Oh well, look, see, you guys should read my guide because it's better a lot of times than what I was saying. There's some other things we need to talk about for the Rakshasa. One is they have chaos power, and which I know it's like, okay, Lucid, you've said literally every unit has chaos power. Yes, 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 but these guys have 2 attacks, and they're super cheap, and they have a lot of HP, and they're blood 1, which means you could potentially get them super duper early. Now, why is all of that relevant? Well, it means these claw attacks, which normally kind of suck, you're gonna, if you're fighting in, like, let's say one of your neighbors made the mistake of taking turmoil, and you've been making these guys since like turn 3, you could potentially roll up at at turn 12, you're gonna have all the sacreds you've been making because you've been making those too, and you're going to have a contingent of about 40 of these guys on the back lines. And because you're in turmoil, they're going to be having 16 attack, and then 22 damage. So you're going to have 2 16 attack, 23 damage attacks kind of powering through. This is without a bless. This is just the unit. So anyway. Next up, we have the Pragasa. Now, these are special. They're about the same cost as the Rakshasa in terms of blood slave per unit. They have more HP. Well, let's pull the unit up. Let's compare them. They have more HP. These are like the gluttons. The spell you summon them with is Feast of Flesh. And notably, you need a nature blood mage to summon it. Now, this can be your Rakshasi, the cap-only slow-to-recruit mage. Or it could be a lucky Kalamuka that got the blood random. And very mage turn efficient. You're going to turn 50 slaves into 15 units, which is remarkably mage turn efficient. Now, the guys you get, well, they have a lot of HP. And what does that mean? Well, it means that if you take Blood Vengeance, they're going to be pretty efficient for that. They're going to be, if you take Blood Vengeance regen, because again, that's kind of where my mind is, because that was how I played them in Dom 4, and I'm not sure it's the right way to play them, but it is a way to play them. I will go that far. It is a way to play them. They're going to be regening 4 per turn, whereas this guy's going to be regening 3, and they're going to have a bigger HP pool to start from, which means there's going to be more time for them to regen in general. But their attack-wise, they're kind of shittier. Because attack-wise, they've got the mace, which, great. It's a one-handed mace, and it's their only weapon, which sucks. Because they've got this other hand just chilling out. So yeah, basically it's a 26 damage, a 28 damage attack. I would rather, now in Chaos Power, it's not going to be that much better. Like in Turmoil 3, it's going to be a 29 damage attack. I'm pretty sure under most circumstances, I would rather have 2. I'd rather have 2 22 damage attacks than 1 29. In most cases, especially in the early age where stuff isn't very heavily armored. And if you do have really heavily armored stuff, you probably want to get a Rakshasa Warrior who hits really freaking hard. So anyway, those are the units. And that comes online pretty early. That's Blood 2. So these are things you can do really early. You can really switch to a Blood economy with Lanka super soon. And then we have a few more units to talk about. These are no longer Blood summons. We have the Vitala. And these are cheap death summons. You get 10 of them for 10 death gems. So it's 1 death gem per. And they have 2 forms. Their first form is this. And basically, it's just a long dead. And when you, if you have a long dead army, these guys will just blend right in. The only thing that you'll notice, they actually have pretty good HP. So they're not kind of, they're not made of paper like some of your other long dead are. They also have a spirit sight, which can be useful. And well, I think all your undead are going to have spirit sight. But yeah, when they switch forms, they lose their armor, but they become ethereal, and they have a pretty good amount of HP in this form still, and they gain life drain, which is an AP attack, armor piercing, and they have touch of madness, which will cause feeble-minded. So you want to send thugs in against Vetlas or Vitalas? I don't know. I wouldn't want to. Especially if they're just mixed in with other chaff. Oof. Seems rough. The problem, especially if you're using them as like anti-thug dudes, a problem is when you walk in front, like people surround a thug, the thugs don't attack in a random direction. They attack in front as a preference, and then if not, behind. So anyway, if you get in the preference spot for a thug, they're going to kill the first form, they're going to kill the second pretty quick. Which means they might not get much time to get these off. But, in a bigger army, it wouldn't be like that. So, anyway, I think these guys are decent uses for death gems. They're definitely going to hold up pretty well against archers, too, because they've got this first form with decent protection and a shield, and the second form with ethereal. And I think if they survive, they go back to their original form, too, which is kind of nice. And then next up, we've got the host of Ganas. And these are, if we look at the unit cost, so these are almost half off the Ganas, but they don't have two forms. It's basically just these guys. They've got a spectral club, a spectral shield. They don't have any protection, but they're ethereal. And they have spirit sight. So generally what these guys are best for is for being an arrow screen. Because with a small shield and with being ethereal, they're going to tie up the enemy for a long time. If you need time to make time for like your heavier hitting demons to tear through something, you can bulk up your front line with Ganas pretty easily, and they'll distract people for a good while your demons chew through them. But Lanka, that's one of the things is what I like about the Vitalas is they're a bit less pigeonholed into just being chaff, like because of these second form attacks, they're kind of decent anti-thug, anti-super combatant. But the Ganas really are just chaff, so it's really for bulking up in early army. But they're cheap, 12 gems for 20. It can take, if things don't have magic weapons, it can take a long ass time to kill them. So that's basically it. Now we've spent all this time talking about the units. I haven't really talked about the strategy. Let's come back up here to the Tapata, because I think this is going to... Talking about this unit is going to highlight just some of the problems this nation has, or some of the challenges. Like on one hand, you want to use these guys to reanimate undead, because we all know reanimated undead are pretty useful. You can use them to patrol down unrest for your blood hunting, which we would love to do. You can use them to bulk up your army so that you can siege. You can use them to raid. There's a lot of nice things you can do with them. But you're going to have to be using very valuable mage turns with Tapata to do that. And that kind of sucks. Okay, so anyway, that's the Tapata. We also need to use him for researching, especially if you go magic, which you may not, but if you go magic, you probably want to research with these. If you go drain, you might consider researching more with Yogini. But, regardless, you're going to have to, it's a fort turn, right? So you're going to have some mages to research, right? So we're going to need some mages to reanimate long dead. We're going to need some mages to research. We're going to need some mages to blood hunt, because obviously this is a nation that loves a good, strong blood economy. We might need a lot of mages to blood hunt. And the more we blood hunt, the less money we're going to have to make more mages. So, yeah, there's that. So our mages need to blood hunt. We've also got really good thugs, which means we probably need to go out site searching. So we need to get some mages to go out site search. And then once we have the gems, we're going to need some mages to forge gear. Yeah, So you can see pretty quickly, it's like, well, and then we also have our blood slaves, so we're going to need to turn those into summons. So this is a nation where no matter how many rock Tapata you have, you're never going to have enough, right? And it goes for kind of, you're never going to have enough mages, is how it always feels when you play these guys. And you're always going to feel like your research is kind of garbage. Well, you may not, because you could say, to hell with reanimating undead. You could say, to hell with a blood economy. I'm just going to focus research. Then you would have really good research. Like, if you just focus one thing, it will be good. But with this nation, you really want to kind of dip your fingers in a lot of different little pots. And when you do that, you never feel like you're going to be great at anything. Like, you feel like you're going to be kind of meh on research. You're kind of meh on a blood economy because you're like, well, I can't do that much blood because I've got to go a bit into research. Anyway, that's how it feels. You can fully choose to, like, go really hard into blood hunting or go really hard into research or go really hard into undead production. But just know, the more you do one thing, the more you're going to be cutting off into another. So that is, I think, a big part of the nation. When you can come through and read the strategy down here, I'm pretty happy with what I wrote. There's a lot of different ways to play them. I think you can play them as an undead chaff nation because you've got really good mages to go behind them. You could play them as a Sabbath communion nation, where that's primarily what you're doing, and you don't really worry too much about blood hunting. You're just going to get maybe some chaff or even just national troops, and you focus on just crapping out mages and getting some key research early. And that could be really effective, because there's some things, if you get it early enough, you're just going to overwhelm the enemy. And these guys do Sabbaths really well. And blood Sabbaths are actually really, like, blood communions are pretty damn strong. In terms of spells, let's talk a little bit about some of the spells we can do. Like, these are going to be some of the common spells that Lanka is going to be looking to hit almost every game. So one of them is Mass Protection. Mass Protection is pretty nice. A lot of our units already have a fire vulnerability. So Mass Protection is something you have to be really careful about, because, even if it's not a fire nation, if they've got like a charcoal shield and you have Mass Protection and fire vulnerability, your sacreds are going to get burnt up. Yeah. But anyway, Mass Protection is pretty good, and by the time you get Mass Protection, you have Fog Warriors. Fog Warriors is something that's obviously going to be really good on these guys. So, yeah, Mass Protection, Fog Warriors if you go Alteration, Darkness if you go Alteration. Whether you have Sacreds or you're Undead, they are all going to thrive in Darkness, and you can get that reasonably early. And then in Alteration, you can also do stuff like Drain Life Spam, especially if you're in a communion and your mages are cooperative. In Enchantment, we have a lot we can do. We can obviously do very strong Skelly Spam communions with these guys, and we can do that pretty darn early. We can do Rigor Mortis plays, especially if we're using more undead. If we're using our demons, Rigor Mortis not quite as good. We can do Life After Death, which is decent. Not super great on this nation, but it could be. Like, especially if you're using Mercado, you could do Mercado Life After Death shenanigans, which would be kind of hilarious. And then very high or reasonably high in Enchantment, we finally get Mass Flight. Mass Flight it's one of those spells that can be game winning. Especially if you have a big horde of demon and undead, and your enemy was planning on kind of keeping you at some distance while they nuked you, and you drop Mass Flight and they're not ready for it. It's just, that's it. It's the game. They lose the fight convincingly and nothing escapes. So Mass Flight's one of the really important spells for this nation. They can also do, and this is in contradiction to Mass Flight, because if you have Storm up, your guys aren't going to fly. You could do Storm after they've already flown to the other side of the battlefield, but yeah, they can do Storm and Evocation. Evocation is another really, really strong school for this nation. Not only are they going to get Storm and then Thunderstrike, which is obviously going to be really nice. You're going to be a little limited by cap-only mages to do it until you can summon Dakini, and then Dakini are kind of your go-to Thunderstrike spammers. But yeah, you can totally go Evocation, do Storm, Thunderstrike, and because you're Air Death, you can do Wailing Winds. And Wailing Winds is really good. And you can do Wind of Death traps. Really good. Yeah, so those are kind of, I would say those are some of the major things you can do with this nation. I'm probably missing out on some things. If you read my guide, you'll see the kind of more full part. But anyway, I've kind of framed this nation as like there's a lot of different things you can do. There's a lot of, like, you can go alteration, you can go enchantment, you can go evocation. Construction is important for them too, for thugging. Yeah, I mean, these guys can thug well. You can go in this nation in so many directions. Like, even if you say you're going to have a heavy blood economy, are you going to put it mostly in, like, Dakini to support undead? Are you going to put in mostly Dakini to be thugs? Are you going to put it mostly in your sacred troops? If so, which ones? And they're all different. They're not, like, small variants of each other. They're pretty dramatically different in terms of, like, how they work. Like, these guys are way different than these, are way different than these, are way different than these. So there's just a lot of different things you can do. Yeah. Now, so anyway, I framed the nation kind of in that you can get pulled in a lot of directions to do a lot of different things. And in the mid-game, you have to make decisions. In the mid-game, you have to pick which of those directions you're going to go in. However, by the time you get to the late game, Lanka should be doing all of them. And that's going to make them very scary. I think Lanka is a very good late-game nation. They have the main thing that they have to worry about if they go to the late game is demonic cleansing. Demonic cleansing is the thing that just makes all demon nations want to give up. And the thing that's important about it, it's going to double all damage demons receive, but that is doubling it before protection. So, like, let's say you have 20 protection and the enemy is going to hit you for 20 damage. Normally, you would take 0 damage. But if they have demonic cleansing up, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, though I could be wrong, but I've gotten wrecked by it, and so I went and checked. Like, this is what happened in the Yomi game. It's going to double the incoming damage to 40, then it hits your protection. So it's not really doubling the damage. Like, in many cases, it's going to be quadrupling, quintupling, like even more than that, the damage. It's a dramatic increase in the damage you take. So anyway, that's something you have to kind of worry about and build around. Oh, the other thing, you can do Wrathful Skies and stuff too. So yeah, and you have assassins. Like, you can do so much different stuff with this nation. I think the question is, there's a few fundamental questions you have to answer at the beginning. You have to say, how heavy are you going to go into your bless? When is your bless going to pay off? How are you going to deal with the rush? Right, because Lanka also, I won't say they struggle with the expansion because they can expand kind of fine, but they go through, in my opinion, a reasonably, like, typically, especially if you want, like, Scales Lanka, be very weak early. But even with the Bless Lanka, they don't have a ton of sacred production at the beginning. They can totally get mowed over by a neighbor. Like, even just, like, Macone. Like, if you remember in my Macone game, I fought Lanka. You know, they had some undead, they had some demons, but I had a shit ton of Peltasts. We just threw javelins at them and they died. Those big old those javelins will solve a lot of problems. They did some thugging with, like, Rakshasas and stuff, but anyway. I think we're about out of time for the guide. But anyway, I hope I've at least opened your eyes to all the various possibilities that are Lanka. And I suppose what we can aspire to is to, in the correct situation, pick the right option. You know, like, if I need assassins, I need to make assassins. If I need Esrapas, I need to make Esrapas. If I need more commanders or thunderstrikers, I guess you want to make those. So it's a nation with a lot of different options. So I guess the idea is, you know, with your bless, you kind of pigeonhole yourself into which of the options you're more going to focus on. But ideally, we don't pigeonhole ourselves much, and we make what we need for what we expect we have coming our way. And with that, I will let you go. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.